Roughly 1 million years ago, you're crouched by a fire in a cave in South Africa. You are not technically a human being yet. You're Homo erectus. You have a smaller brain, a heavier brow, no language, and no idea what a century even is, let alone how many of them are about to pass. But you're already doing something almost no other animal on the planet bothers to do, and that is keeping fire alive on purpose, feeding and guarding it through the dark like it's a member of your tribe. And every single night, for longer than you can remember, smoke drifts straight into your face, whether you want it to or not. Here's the detail nobody puts in the textbook version of this story. Long before any human being chose to inhale smoke, every single one of our ancestors was already doing it, just by sitting near a fire. In the strictest sense, smoking might be older than the decision to smoke. So the real question isn't when humans invented or started smoking. It's actually how long it took for someone to notice what all that smoke was already doing to them and decide to chase the feeling on purpose. Let's nail down the fire timeline first, because it matters more than people assume. The oldest solid, physical, largely uncontested evidence of controlled fire comes from Wonderwork Cave, deep in South Africa, where archaeologists found burnt bones and burnt plant ash sealed far enough inside the cave that a passing wildfire couldn't explain it. That evidence dates to roughly 1 million years ago. Some researchers argue the real number is even older, somewhere between 1.6 and 2 million years. And their evidence isn't ash at all. It's our ancestors' own bodies. Smaller guts, bigger brains. Exactly the physical signature you'd expect from a species that had already started cooking its food and freeing up the enormous store of energy raw digestion usually eats alive. We may have started rearranging our own anatomy around fire before we have a single confirmed hearth to point to. But owning fire and building an entire life around it are two very different milestones, and the gap between them is enormous. It took several 100,000 more years, until somewhere around 300,000 to 400,000 years ago, for fire to stop being an occasional trick and start being the fixed center of camp. Repeated hearths, same spot, night after night, generation after generation. Now fast forward a very long way, near what's now the Great Salt Lake in Utah, roughly 12,000 years ago. You're one of the first humans to ever set foot on this continent. You're part of a small band pushing through a landscape nobody has ever walked before. Fire is already the center of your world by this point. It has been for hundreds of thousands of years of ancestral memory. What's new is everything else. Every plant around you is unfamiliar. And on a night like any other, your hand closes around a few small seeds from a wild plant, growing at the edge of the marsh, and tend to the fire they go. Half out of habit, because you have to keep the fire burning. Here's why that moment matters biologically, and it's a less flattering origin than you'd expect. The plant in question makes a chemical called nicotine, and nicotine wasn't built for your benefit. It's a defense compound, evolved by the plant to poison the insects that try to eat it. Nicotine happens to fit into receptors in an animal's nervous system, almost like a key cut for the wrong lock. The same receptors your own neurons use to pass signals to one another. In an insect, enough of it floods the system and shuts it down permanently. In a human, in a small enough dose, that same interference does something the plant never intended. It triggers a burst of dopamine, your brain's own reward signal. Burn the leaf, breathe the smoke, and that molecule is in your bloodstream within about 10 seconds, faster than almost anything you could eat or drink. A weapon, repurposed by accident into one of the fastest pleasure delivery systems your body has access to. In 2015, archaeologists working at a site called Wishbone, out on the mudflats of the Great Salt Lake Desert, found a small blackened hearth, easy to walk right past. Inside it were 4 charred seeds from a wild tobacco plant. When the dating came back in a study published in 2021, the number was 12,300 years old. That's roughly 9,000 years older than any previously confirmed tobacco use on the continent, which up until that point had rested on a set of ceramic pipes from Alabama, only about 3,000 years old, with faint nicotine residue still clinging to their bowls. This wasn't a small correction. It rewrote the opening chapter of the story entirely. Here's the honest complication archaeologists themselves point out. Seeds don't carry much nicotine. Only the leaves do. So there's no absolute proof those seeds went into the fire specifically to be smoked rather than burned for some other reason entirely. What the evidence proves is that people were deliberately handling and burning tobacco at that hearth. It doesn't hand you a signed confession that someone leaned in afterward and inhaled on purpose. 12,000 years back, the trail goes cold exactly where you most want it to keep going. Halfway around the world, in the Pamir Mountains of what's now western China, archaeologists uncovered wooden bowls buried inside a cemetery dating back roughly 2,500 years. The bowls were lined with stones that had been superheated and coated in the chemical residue of burned cannabis, not the ordinary fiber and seed strain grown across the region for millennia already, but a specifically potent variety, chosen deliberately for its strength. Mourners at funerals were building small braziers, heating stones, and breathing in the smoke together, likely reaching for an altered state to send off the dead. And this wasn't just archaeology confirming a guess. A Greek historian writing around the same period had already described something remarkably similar happening among a different group entirely: nomadic horsemen on the Central Asian steppe, setting up small enclosed tents, tossing plant matter onto heated stones, and inhaling the fumes together, reportedly with real enthusiasm. For centuries, historians assumed he was embellishing. Then archaeologists started digging into burial mounds from that same culture and found the exact setup he'd described. He hadn't been exaggerating at all. If anything, he'd undersold it. 2 continents, no trade route connecting them at that point, no shared language, no shared plant. Just 2 separate populations, independently landing on the same basic move. Take a plant, set it on fire, breathe what comes off it, and something in your head will change. That's not a coincidence you can wave away. That's evidence the underlying drive is close to universal. It doesn't stop at ritual either. Long before anyone was smoking for pleasure, plenty of early cultures were doing it for medicine. One of the oldest surviving medical documents in the world, an Egyptian papyrus from roughly 1550 BC, describes inhaling smoke from heated herbs specifically to treat problems with the throat and lungs. A treatment that sounds backwards to modern ears until you remember that inhaled medicine is still exactly how we treat asthma and deliver anesthesia today. The delivery method survived 3,500 years. Only the fire part got replaced. Ancient Indian medical tradition developed its own detailed version of the same idea, a practice built entirely around inhaling specific herbs for specific conditions, refined and documented over centuries, not improvised or accidental. There's also a piece of this that rarely gets discussed, and it has nothing to do with chemistry at all. Humans are relentlessly social animals, and for most of our history, staying inside a group wasn't optional. It was the difference between surviving and not. Shared ritual, especially the shared experience of altering your mind together, is one of the most efficient tools a group has for building trust fast. Modern research on group ritual backs this up directly. Shared intense experiences measurably increase trust and group cohesion, which means those funeral braziers in the Pamir Mountains, and whatever version of the same ritual was happening around fires on other continents at the same time, weren't just about the plant. They were social infrastructure, built out of smoke. The story most people already carry around in their heads starts in 1492, with European sailors watching Caribbean islanders roll dried leaves into a tube, light one end, and pull the smoke into their lungs. The exact moment the word tobacco entered European vocabulary, and eventually every corner store on the planet. That story isn't wrong. It's just the very last page, mistaken for the first one. By the time any European ever saw it, the practice was already older than written history in the region, a habit carried forward since before anyone had planted a single deliberate crop anywhere on the continent. Which is really the point worth sitting with, underneath all of it. We tend to imagine the desire to alter your own mind as a late invention, something that shows up only once people have settled down, built cities, and found some spare time on their hands. The fire timeline says otherwise. So does the smoke. Long before agriculture, before permanent shelter, before anything resembling a civilization, people scattered across wildly different corners of the planet were independently running the same quiet experiment. Sit by the fire, throw something in, breathe deep, and pay attention to what happens next. So when did ancient humans first start smoking? On the fire side of the question, over 1 million years before that, back when the word human didn't even mean what it means now. On the deliberate, breathe it in on purpose side, at least 12,000 years ago, in a desert hearth that no longer exists, left behind by someone who never knew they'd leave a trace. The fire went out a very long time ago. What's left is 4 blackened seeds, half a world of independent confirmation, and proof that curiosity found its way into human lungs about as early as it possibly could have.